Hello, my name is Vincent Tovar, Associate Executive Director of MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association. This year, we're celebrating our Golden Jubilee, 50 years of closing gaps in our Texas public schools. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on creating a culture of voting in Texas public schools, which is co-sponsored by Texas Educators Vote. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Laura Yeager is the founder and director of Texas Educators Vote. She received the 2019 Power of Women Award from the League of Women Voters of Texas. Laura was also a founder and remains a board member of Texans Advocating for Meaningful Student Assessment, also known as TAMSA, a grassroots organization of parents advocating for reduced focus on high-stakes standardized testing. I'm gonna say that again, a grassroots organization of parents advocating for reduced focus on high-stakes standardized testing. In 2018, Laura co-founded Just Funded Texas, a statewide parent and student group advocating for increased state funding for Texas public schools. Personally, it is a great relief to have a leader both advocating at the ledge and bringing gained information and strategies to the people who need it most, school communities. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Vincent. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, Vincent, and thank Jamie, and thank the Mexican American School Board Association for inviting me to talk a little bit today about Texas Educators Vote. I am extremely grateful for all of our trustees across the state and for, I know it's hard work that you all do, standing up for our kids and fighting for what's right, and I really appreciate the work, and I'm honored to be here today. So what I wanted to do today was, as you all know, I was invited to talk about Texas Educators Vote, and let me just get it onto here. So Texas Educators Vote, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, why I sort of created it, what our mission is, the goals, and then at the end, I'm going to get more into the tools that really help school board members, superintendents, principals, teachers, parents, everyone create a culture of voting in our schools. And that is the tagline. The goal of Texas Educators Vote is exactly that. It is about creating a culture of voting in Texas public schools by educators modeling that behavior for students. So, to talk a little bit about when and how this started, I know Vincent mentioned that I was one of the founders of TAMSA, and I then went and did government relations for TAX, which is the Texas Association of Community Schools, which is an association like yours, but that represents the 900 and something small school districts in the state. And through that, I started working not only on testing issues, but I saw how all the issues fit together, how funding and accountability and teacher pay and a wide variety of issues that affect our schools, our teachers, our trustees, that they are all related. And after the 2015 legislative session, we were taking stock of what was going well, what great legislation, little bit we've gotten past, and what really threatening legislation for public schools had been stopped by advocacy. Right at that time, I went to a meeting that Austin ISD actually held. It was a legislative debrief, and Harvey Kronberg, who is the head of the quorum report, many of you may know, did a debrief on the legislature and on elections. And I heard a statistic that was horrifying and really shocking to me about how low the voter turnout is and had been in Texas. And he gave an example that it was a tiny, tiny percentage of people voting, for example, that had determined many of our most important elections. He gave an example of the primary runoff in the Republican Party, for example, for lieutenant governor, which is what determined lieutenant governor, and this was in 2015. And he talked about how few people were really picking our leaders. So I went back after that meeting and spoke with my boss at the Texas Association of Community Schools and said, what if during this interim, while we are regrouping for the next session, we were to try to encourage educators to vote. What if we tried to increase the voter turnout in the state of Texas? It could have two potential effects. One, educators would vote, and that would be an example to students. Two, we might get elected more people who supported public school, not by telling people how to vote, but if educators vote in higher percentage, presumably that could be a result. And three, even if it didn't change the outcome of any elections, knowing that educators are paying attention might change the conversation. And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. And you'll see that that actually did happen. And when we started, we said, well, let's start this. Here, hold on, let me go back to here. This shows you just some examples of newspaper headlines around that time. So this was even a few years later, but in 2018, still voter turnout in Texas was dead last. In 2019, it showed that voter turnout was up, but it still was extremely low. And the other is a headline from the Annette Strauss Institute here at UT for Civic Life. And even though voter turnout came up, and after the 2018 election, we are not last. We are at the bottom, near the bottom, but we are not last. Texas ranked the lowest in the nation for political participation and civic involvement, which means we're not talking about the issues and we are not relating them to our lives. So this really was a driving force for me. So I pulled out a statistic. This I think is also important. The Texas Tribune article from February 2018. I'm sorry I didn't get that up on the screen, but it looked at other reasons why voter turnout is so low. You know, Texas doesn't make it super easy to vote, but it does. There are definitely ways to vote. There are some limits, and we need to understand how to vote, which we'll get to, because that's the real goal, is for us to make it easy for people to understand how to register, how to do their research, and how to vote. But looking at this, the demographic graphics are really interesting. I mean, when you look at this, you see that a third of the state's Hispanic population, for example, isn't of voting age. So that makes the modeling of civic engagement for young people, especially in the Latino Hispanic community, really important, because the data does show that while Texas is not real great at getting voter turnout, young people are, 18 to 25-year-olds are generally the lowest turnout percentage, and then the Latino community is often one of the lowest as well. And it may in part be because it's not a culture of voting, and I'm not sure. Many of you may know more than I do on that. But having teachers who are role models and leaders model that behavior for students can only help as we move forward and as the population grows. So our mission.
Laura, if I might interject real quick, sorry to interrupt. I just thinking about the Latinx, Latino population and the low voter turnout. A lot of it is because, you have countries where there's a lot of corruption and there's just a lot of disenfranchisement. So that leads to voter apathy, low voter turnout. And, we're really seeing that reflected in here, where we have the Electoral College determining the outcome as opposed to the popular vote. So how would you change that perception? How could you help change, people's minds?
Well, that's a really good point, Vincent, and that puts it in some clear context. I mean, a couple of things. One, and what we try to do here is, I think a lot of people also don't vote because they just don't think it matters. And so part of our role here is to show people how the people they elect make really important decisions that affect them every day, and also to sort of push back and try to fight some of the laws that are restrictive, which we'll get to a little bit later with some of the vote by mail, that there's a discussion about that going on now. But also just to help people understand, there are some hoops to go through, and there is the Electoral College, but that doesn't affect your local elections. It doesn't affect your school board. There's gerrymandering that will affect your vote for the legislature, but we have redistricting coming. There's the census, all of those things. It's all civic engagement, and the more people are engaged, the more fair and the more your vote will count. So it's a good point, and it's a good time to ask that question, because we really need people to fill out the census, and we really need people to vote to try to get people to really represent their communities. So people writing the new districting decisions will be representing their communities. So the mission, when we created it, and it holds true, is Texas Educators Vote is a nonpartisan, partnership-based project working to create a culture of voting in Texas public schools. Our goal is to encourage and support educators in modeling civic engagement. And then one thing that we've been very clear on, especially because there was a little pushback a couple years ago from people who weren't so excited about having educators vote, was that Texas Educators Vote exactly aligns with the State Board of Education TEKS, the Texas Constitution, and Texas laws that require educators to register eligible students and staff to vote. I'm going to give an example of a TEK in just a minute, but I sat down with the TEKs just to be sure several years ago, and the social studies TEKs in kindergarten through 12th grade, every year there are TEKs on civics, citizenship, and voting. The Texas Constitution requires, Article 7 talks about public education and funding it. So it is not an issue. It is a part of our society. And then there are Texas laws that require every high school principal to be a voter registrar and register eligible students twice a year. So this is stuff we're supposed to be doing.
It makes me think of, sorry to interrupt again, but I love all this information and all the work that you do. And it reminds me of how social studies are often not taught in elementary schools, especially elementary schools that have large percentages of economically disadvantaged, low-income, families. And a lot of times, social studies, there isn't a separate block for social studies. Instead, it's just integrated into literacy as like reading and writing blocks, language arts blocks. So it becomes almost a crutch, because kids think that Martin Luther King Jr. knew Abraham Lincoln, and it's just nightmarish, to the point where by the time they get to high school, the love of social justice, or just have civics, humanities, is hard to create, because there hasn't been a culture, a strong foundation for kids at the lower grade levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is a big push from people across a broad political spectrum to increase civics testing. I'm not testing, I apologize. The teaching of civics. And some states have been more proactive. There are a couple, I believe it's like Illinois and Pennsylvania, that have really created some great curriculum that people are looking at. And there's been some legislation proposing that as well. This is one example. So the social studies TEK, this one is from first grade, which I think is super important. And it talks about citizenship, but most importantly, it requires teaching about participation in government by educating oneself about the issues, respectfully holding public officials to their word, and voting. So if we and our social studies teachers are required to teach this to students, they should definitely model what they are teaching. The whole practice what you preach, I think it's practice what you teach. And this actually was a TEK in first and third and fourth grade. And the State Board of Education removed it in third and fourth grade because they thought it was repetitive, which I find strange, because it is closer to voting age. But the other thing I will mention, that I wanted to mention a little bit back, was when we did our TAMSA work, we really found out that people don't know who makes what decisions. And so when we realized, when we were pushing back and we started with the school board and said, oh wait, they don't make those decisions, we learned what the State Board of Education does, what the school board does, what the legislature does, what comes from the federal government. And that's something that kids and teachers, a lot of them, don't know. So that's part of our work as well, is really educating people on who does what and why your vote really makes some decisions that really affect you every day. So in terms of our partners and who's working with us, when we started this, it was TAX, which was the small school district. The Pastors for Texas Children joined in, thought it was a great idea. The rural educators joined in. And at first, some of the groups were like, no, we're good. We don't need this. But little by little, we are now up to 25 partners, from teacher groups to just advocacy groups. The League of Women Voters joined in 2016, I believe. They bring a whole host of fantastic resources that we use all the time, and we've actually helped them expand as well, because their Vote 411, which we will talk about, they have these great tools, but they only have been reaching out to where they have leagues, which is 20, 30 places around our enormous state. And they were able to see how many people accessed it. And through our partners, through our school boards, through our school districts, through our teacher groups, their word is their tools for people to research their vote and figure out how to vote have gone way farther into areas of the state they've never been able to reach. So, Raise Your Hand Texas joined on, and they are really, as you probably know, have gotten really involved in advocacy and in people, engaging them and being knowledgeable for elections. They held candidate forums, 40-some candidate forums around the state for the primary, and I think they'll do that again. So I think we're all sort of encouraging one another to get engaged. TASB is a member, and their legal team runs through everything. So, school board members are getting information about it. The principals, special ed, retired teachers who are fantastic resources as well. And then we've got room. This is our third page. It's all on one page on the website, but the high school coaches joined recently, and they are super excited about encouraging people to vote. And that, coaches are real role models for students. And so for them to be modeling civic engagement, talking about the importance of voting and being civically engaged, wearing an I voted sticker is fantastic. And as I think I mentioned to Jamie and Vincent, we would love to have your organization be a member too and reach out to the members of your group. And so here, I'm going to talk for just a minute about what it means to be a partner, because it's not like a big and scary thing. Basically, the partners share. I do a weekly, closer to elections, it's a weekly voter update on a key issue, key actions that you can take, and I'll show you that on the website. We've got a very active website full of resources. I'm active on Facebook and Twitter. And so the members really share the message. They're multipliers. I think of it as like I'm in the center, and then each of the groups is rippling it out further and further to other groups. Texas Foreign Language Association, they have it on their website. I don't know that they've officially joined yet. And then we do conference calls to share information about what each of the partners are doing, what the secondary school principals are doing, what one of their principals, for example, we learned was doing every time a kid turned 18, the principal would invite a student in to have a cart with a birthday card, a cupcake, and a voter registration card, and they talked about the rights and responsibilities of being an adult, including voting, and how important it is. And so they're just great ideas that can be spread through the community. So we have those, and there's a steering committee. So and then partners, one partner, I think TASB, printed our brochures one time, or they've printed them several times. They're really neat, and they're on the website. Somebody lent me a web designer once, so everybody just does what they can, but I'm really the one generating the content. And then we have guest bloggers as well. So that's what it means to be a partner. So back to why this is important. We could tell our work was helping. One, in part because we did get some pushback when some people who were not super excited about people voting got nervous that teachers were going to vote. And that was interesting because it did send a message to teachers and educators and community members in general that your vote must matter if people are interested in whether or not you are going to exercise it. But people voted like never before. And in the 2018 elections, voter turnout was up. And because educators engaged, specifically educators, if you look at any article, the Texas legislative session, the #1 issue was funding for public education. And had educators not voted, that would not have happened. So it was a direct result of people engaging, advocating, talking about the love for their public schools, talking about the need to fund our schools. So they said the 86 legislative session was the education session because educators voted. And you'll see from this graphic that, that is an enormous jump in voter turnout. It still leaves some room to be desired, but from 33% to 53% of registered voters was a really big increase and something to celebrate. But our work isn't done. I have this pie chart up on my wall because so that blue were the registered voters that voted. But look at that pie. More than half of that pie did not vote. And so the low-hanging fruit, which really pulls at my heart is that 41.4% of people who were registered in Texas to vote who did not vote. And then the 12.6% who could have registered but didn't. So, we do a better job of registering voters than we do turning out voters. And I really think that relates to some of the things you mentioned, Vincent, and also the fact that people don't understand why their vote matters. I pulled up an interesting statistic as well, and this was from, I think this was from the Houston Chronicle. Let me just double check so I can tell you. And it was based on research by the Pew Research Center that showed that Texas, for example, 30% of eligible voters are Latino. And if you look at the number of eligible Latino voters, 5.6 million voters. Well, I just added up from the Democratic and Republican primary in 2018, which was an all-time high, 4.1 Texans voted. So had all eligible Latino voters voted, it would have been more than the number of people that voted. So there is a lot of power in the vote, and that's where modeling and engaging people is just so important. I don't know if there are any questions yet, but I would love to walk you all through some key things on our website and explain how to use some of these tools. Should I pause for a moment and see if there are any questions yet?
I think that one question that comes to mind is how we can support high schools more, high school staff, high school communities more, to promote high school students registering, and as well as their families. I know that, for example, at a local AISD high school, you have a social studies teacher, a history teacher that will table during lunchtime with some students, but it's very, the effort's small, and it's great that the students and certain staff are motivated, but are there examples statewide where high schools, the whole staff is on board and it's more of a community effort?
Yes. And one of the guest blogs I did, I think it was Palmer ISD, and it is easier in a small district. There is no question. They had 100% participation. So, there are a lot of groups, and I'm affiliated and happy to share, there are a ton of groups working on getting students registered to vote. I think we do need some more focus on getting them out to vote once they're registered. But what we specifically do, and I don't know that Austin has done the strongest job of that, is register everyone working in the school district, every cafeteria worker, every eligible voter, every cafeteria worker, every bus driver, every custodian, every counselor, every teacher, every special ed aide, every single educator. Because I've tabled at a handful of high schools, and we do get some students, but there are people walking by who work on the campuses. And so I'm going to pull up a list of some things that people can do. But whenever someone gets a job, they should immediately be given a voter registration card, a convocation every year. They should, I believe that's what they called when they bring you all back, people on staff. You need to ask and say, have you moved? Have you updated your voter registration? There's just so much that can be done to make sure that every person working in the district is doing it. And then some of the smaller districts have done some things, and where there was one, I think it was in Palestine ISD, where the guy looked at the records and said, 4% of people had voted in his district. He had a meeting, he shoved a little card under the chairs and said, look under your chair. And only 4 of the people had a card. And he said, if you have a card, stand up. And it wasn't those specific people. But he said, this is the number of people voting in our district. I would like it to increase. And by the next year, it was like 88% because he made it a priority. So that's really what this is about. And the trustees, the school board has a lot of things they can do to support the superintendent in committing to creating a culture of voting. I'm going to get to the specific ways each person can engage in a few minutes. So we can whip to the website at the end, but I have screenshots that walk you through it. So at the top, this is stopped from yesterday. So there were 70 days till the July 14th election. We always have a countdown to the next election with then right up front and center, the last day to register, the days of early voting, and then when election day is. And then I'm going to come back to it, but these election text reminders are a real simple way, and I'll tell you how you can sign up for those in a few minutes. But I send not a lot, but last day to register, early voting starts tomorrow, just little things where you can link straight and do what you need to do and just get a little reminder. But so the real point, the way we do this modeling civic engagement, 3 easy steps, it is register, research, and vote. So I'm going to first show you, like, were you to click on that register, you would get taken directly to the Secretary of State site, where you can, one, check and see if you're already registered and see if your registration is valid, if it's up to date, if you've moved, if you need to change anything. And then if it is not, you can right there apply to register. So that takes you straight where you need to do your registering. The next one, which is research, we link to just 2 main groups. We link to Teach the Vote and the League of Women Voters. And they are fantastic resources. And when I've presented this to educators, they've said, this is what I don't know. A lot of people don't vote because they don't know about the candidates, they don't know about the issues, and they're intimidated. And so Teach the Vote is an arm of the Association of Texas Professional Educators, ATPE, and they have a questionnaire that they give to every single candidate for the legislature, for SBOE, for statewide office. They don't do the local ones. It's just, I think it's too much for them to get into the nitty gritty there. But your local papers should do that, where they ask everyone just education specific questions to see where the candidates are on vouchers, on testing, on funding, on every possible issue that is charged, and you can go and compare them. And so it's right there at your fingertips. Sometimes people won't answer, and I think that sometimes sends a message too. If you value education, you should probably answer some of those questions. The League of Women Voters also has their voter guides. And then most importantly, this Vote 411, which is the tool that everyone should have. You come in, you click on that, and once it's close enough to the election time and they have all the information in, you put in your address, it pulls up exactly what will be on your ballot. You can pull up the candidates, you can check which one you think you're going to vote for, and then print out what you want to vote for and bring that with you to the polls. So it's especially important here in Texas, where it is illegal to open your phone at a polling booth. That I would deem that a barrier as well, because a lot of young people don't like to print things. A lot of low-income people do not have printers. But if there's any way to print it, try to do that so you can bring it in, because you can't look it up on your phone. But this has you ready. You are educated and engaged and ready to go vote. And it demystifies the process. So that's the research section. And then the vote takes you again to the League of Women Voters with everything you could possibly need. And the Secretary of State's office has it too. Who, what, where, when, why to go vote. And then, when you get a little further down the website, this is the part I was talking about. I really think this is a big reason why people don't vote is, and then by not voting, you are picking people too. By not voting, you are giving a few people a lot of power. So elections are determined by who shows up. And I think it's really important for people to note that the people you pick, they decide how much to fund the schools, how much to rely on standardized testing, what teach there are, whether you use A through F and what that's based on, how much to fund teachers, you click and you read more. But the reason this came to me once, I was walking with a friend of mine who considers herself civically engaged. And she and I don't agree on politics all the time, but she was appalled to find that there were going to be guns on campus. And she said, I will not be able to send my daughter to a Texas campus, a public campus, because I'm afraid. And I said, well, did you vote? And she said, well, yes. And I said, well, if this is your issue, look and see how people are voting on it, because whatever issue it is, whether it's the environment, whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it is women's rights or LGBT rights or public education, there has to be something that you care about. And I hope public education is what's driving a lot of trustees, but look and see what people are thinking. You can look up their records. And so this is where we really need people to understand, you don't just say, I'm the most conservative, I'm the most liberal, I'm going to vote, and then get to school and wonder why, there's a raccoon falling on your head because there's not money to fix the schools, why they're testing the kids and not being allowed to do some meaningful learning. Like, you pick the people that decide. So I don't mean to be on my soapbox, but this one really gets to me, and I'm really hoping through our efforts that educators understand that their vote determines their livelihood and the future for these kids. The next thing I want to go to, which we added to the website, which I think is fantastic, is it's not just one group, it's not just teachers, it's not just superintendents. Every single really stakeholder or participant in our schools has a role to play. And so the next slide is going to talk about what we put on the board member list of what you can do. So if you click on, each one, it'll give you different ideas. So, Vincent, this talks a little bit to one of the questions you asked. So the first thing you can do is commit to support culture of voting. And TASB actually had put together a sample board resolution, and they did update it this last year. I'm going to show you all that. That's in an upcoming slide. But really, the reason we created that was because we had heard that years and years ago, a superintendent in a small rural town had gone out of his way to make sure students were registered to vote, understood the importance of voting and encouraged them to get out and vote. And somebody was a little worried that young people were going to vote and push back and tried to get that superintendent fired. So we are asking superintendents to commit to a culture of voting, because in addition to being grassroots up, when a superintendent commits that is part of their vision and mission to have a civically engaged electorate and community and strengthen democracy, they need backup from the board to say, we support you in creating culture of voting, and you're not going to get fired for doing what is right and what is required. Now, if you break the law, that's different. I'm going to tell you the do's and don'ts. But if your district has not adopted a board resolution, it can be the same as the one that is the sample, or it can just be very simple. We support a culture of voting. You can make it whatever you want. Districts have done a wide variety of things, and I do not post who has adopted them, because people who were worried about people voting were harassing people, and we're not doing this for people to get in trouble. We're doing this so students grow up and understand what being a citizen means, and educators are modeling that. So anyway, so that's one. You can aim for 100% voter registration. You can work with city and county. You can have competitions. You can encourage competitions between campuses. A lot of districts and campuses have said, if we have 100% voter turnout, you all can wear blue jeans. If we have 100%, and educators currently love wearing blue jeans. I don't, but I guess it's more comfy than what they usually wear. You can't give any monetary awards, but you can have a friendly competition between districts, between campuses, between classes, to encourage people to register, and to vote. And talk about it at graduation. That is one thing that I do think Austin has been a model, working closely with our League of Women Voters. They had volunteers at every graduation to register students who are eligible, because many graduating students are then eligible to vote. And then I will show you how to do the last two things in the upcoming slides. So this is something that TASB had on their website, and I think it may still be on there, but it does talk about how to promote a culture of voting, that it is legal to promote a culture of voting, what the school districts can do, and then in there, the automatic updates that the trustees can adopt. It has been in those before, and so if anybody needs me to check, I can tell you how to look and see if you've already adopted it. But otherwise, here is the sample, and it is on the website under resources, a sample board resolution that you may consider for your board to adopt. Again, nothing nefarious, nothing questionable. It is on the up and up. We support modeling responsible citizenship. We support doing everything we can to inform employees and eligible students about where and when they can vote, creating district communications that encourage employees and students. Really, it's about supporting the district and making this a priority. One other tool we have, and this is on the website, that the trustees can do and model, is we have an oath to vote. And it basically just says, I'm an educator and I commit to vote in every election, because that is how you create a culture. It's not just by voting once every 4 years, it's voting in every local election, every runoff, every bond election. And that is another thing I want to raise. If people start just talking about voting when you're about to have a bond election, it does raise a red flag. It needs to be all the time. It can't just be when you need to get something passed, because then people who are not a fan of the bond will start pushing back and it will look political. But we encourage people to take the oath, and this all shows up on social media at key times and on voter updates. So, and the reason we did this was Diane Ravitch, who many of you will know, is a leader, and she highlighted one of the states had asked people to take an oath to vote, and they found that if you commit to do it, you feel a little more responsible too, and it was increasing voter turnout. The do's and don'ts, we really want to be clear that people know what legally they can and cannot do. We do not want anyone to get in trouble or do anything that is not legally acceptable. And so this is right and visible on the website. We have more detailed do's and don'ts for, teachers, for school board members, for superintendents, also in the resources section of our website. But right here, the basic ones are do's, things you can and should do: encourage staff, students, parents, and community members to vote, share factual information about voter registration, polling locations, dates, and hours of voting, teach the TEEKs, register voters, and ensure staff and students have time to vote, advocate for the interests of Texas public education. And this comes directly from TASB. So they are as strict in their legal interpretation as anyone. You can advocate for public education as long as it does not include public resources or time to campaign for a specific candidate, political party, or ballot measure. And that's when you get to the don'ts. You cannot electioneer. You cannot advocate for a candidate, issue, or party, or ballot measure. You cannot use public funds, including school district resources, to do that, to support or oppose a candidate, party, or ballot measure. That's the bottom line. And you can't use campus resources to do that. But that is electioneering, supporting, opposing a specific candidate, party, or ballot measure. An individual can do that. That is your right as a citizen of the United States. You are allowed to do that. But as a trustee on a trustee website, I would be very careful about something that identifies with the district for doing anything that looks like it could possibly be electioneering. There are people looking for people to mess up, and we don't want anyone to. We really want us just to do the right thing.
And Laura, there are even people that aren't messing up, but they're still under attack. Advocates who are trying to promote elections, an election day holiday by mail are under attack right now, and by folks who might want to limit the ability to vote. So how have you dealt with that, or how, have you been under attack? How have you handled it?
We have in 2018, was it 2018? Yes. One of the Tea Party groups in the Dallas area got wind that school boards were adopting resolutions and contacted an extremely conservative Republican senator who contacted the Attorney General, who, made a non-binding opinion saying it is not educational to bring students to vote. If you're doing something, basically there was a lot of harassment and intimidation that did scare school districts out from doing the right thing. So that is why we have been very clear about saying what you can do and what you can't do. We don't want anyone to do anything illegal, but I believe their efforts, and we're going to get to vote by mail in just a couple minutes, it's happening again. Some of the people in charge, I believe, are in charge because not a lot of people voted. And our laws make it hard for people to vote. But when there is something like a pandemic, or when there are legal ways that people can vote that would expand the electorate, it scares some people who are only elected by very few people voting. So I am all for everyone voting who is eligible to vote, but you do need to be conscious and conscientious about doing it, and know that people are looking for you to mess up. And we can go into more detail on it. I mean, there are people with a lot of money that are working pretty hard to try to scare people from voting. Before we get to that vote by mail, and we're almost there, and we're getting pretty closer to the end. But I do a voter update, which is a blog. I know Jamie gets it. I believe you may get it, Vincent, too. Our partners send these out in different ways, but here are some examples of different ones I've done different times. You know, register to vote, voter registration day. So each one is focused on what's key for that week, a little intro, some key actions that need to be taken, and then some social media posts you can make that our partners sometimes share it in its entirety. Sometimes they take bits and pieces. The one that went out most recently was specifically about vote to mail, and we do have a survey that if you go on our website, you can take that survey about whether you think people should be able to vote by mail. We've got some great images, and some of our partners help me with those. Friends of Texas Public Schools has a real good graphics person who helps with those sometimes too. So they're relevant, they give people information, and our partners share those a lot of times with their members. And so, you know, vote by mail is a big deal. I want to mention, you know, the May elections, a lot of school boards, a lot of bonds, a lot of TREs were going to be in May. They got pushed. You know, the runoff elections got pushed to July 14th, and I believe all the May elections have now been pushed to November. So these are just some key dates coming up. The last day to register for the July 14th election is June 15th. Early voting starts July 6th. And then vote by mail applications are due July 2nd. And that is a really delicate and important topic that I do want to hit on before we finish. The League of Women Voters and many counties, the county elections office is the final decision maker in each region for what, how to interpret this election law. They're encouraging people to vote by mail. I know I do not want to go stand with a bunch of people and be exposed and bring that back to my friends and family about the coronavirus. So there has been a great push nationwide and statewide for vote by mail. Right now, the law says, and it's a little bit vague, the current law says to be eligible to vote early by mail in Texas, you must be 65 or older, disabled, and I'm highlighting next, we can talk about that, out of the county on election day and early voting, or confined in jail but otherwise eligible. And so the disabled is what is up for dispute. Disabled is not defined. And currently what happens is Travis County, I believe El Paso, San Antonio, some of the larger urban districts that are extremely concerned and have a lot of voters are saying you can say that you are disabled by fear of the coronavirus, and that you can just apply to vote by mail and they will accept that. A local district judge issued an order, an Austin-based judge, saying that that qualifies. Anyone can apply for an absentee ballot based on being disabled by the coronavirus and fear of contracting it. Another concern as well is many of the election workers are over 65. They are afraid. They are afraid to go for their health. As some studies have shown that this is supported by many people for May, for November, and really to make it for long term. The states with the highest voter turnout make it easier to vote. They vote by mail. I believe Colorado, Washington State, anywhere you can register online, you can vote by mail. So people who want more people to vote do support these measures. However, the same person that did not love educators voting seems to be pushing back on this as well, and is threatening. Again, he has not issued any binding opinions, but basically he is trying to scare people from expanding the vote by mail. There have been, I believe there will be another ruling in the middle of May. It would be great if the Secretary of State came out and said everyone is eligible to use that disabled heading to vote by mail, but the jury's still out. So just know this has become a political issue. But the other thing is you can apply to vote by mail. I have children who've been out of state for college and who, one of them applied to vote by mail. It was hard, took a couple letters and stamp that 20-year-olds don't do, but he was able to vote by mail. He got his ballot in the mail, but he ended up coming home. If you apply to vote by mail and later they say you can't and you need to go in person, you just need to bring that ballot with you and turn it in. Don't fill it out. Turn it in and say, I'm not using it. I'm going to vote in person, because they will not let you do both. You need to turn in what they thought you were going to send in order to be able to vote in person. So this is ongoing, and I will keep people posted, but I am hoping that it is expanded and we really need people to vote. The last couple things I wanted to mention before we, open up for any other questions is just the key tools. Our website is a wealth of information. It's texaseducatorsvote.com. Here's just an example of one of the social media posts that we had. Cute children showing the diversity of our fantastic state. Facebook and Twitter, I'm extremely active. I've quieted a little just because I just wanted to be respectful from all the things that we've been worrying about with the coronavirus, but I'll be ramping it back up soon. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and Instagram, not quite as active, but I'm going to ramp that up. The text election reminders I mentioned, if you text to the number 40649, the letters text ed vote, you will get on my list, and I send very few but very important text reminders. So please do that. And then, really one of the last things is just that the real power is in your vote, and don't give your power away by not voting. And then I want to leave with some contact information about how to reach me, my cell phone, my email, and then another thanks for letting me come and talk about this. I know it's coronavirus and COVID-19 is on top of everyone's mind, but this is super duper important. And we've got really important elections coming up, and the people we elect are going to decide how we recover from this crisis. So thank you again for inviting me, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Laura. That's awesome. I think that it makes me think all the work that you're doing and all the information you're sharing makes me think of how people have to stay on top of the issues, all the time. And it's a lot, and it can be overwhelming and a lot of work. And then people burn out. Over the years, you see people step up and do great work, but it just becomes a fight that they feel like is a cycle, and it's never ending. And they just are on their own. But you doing work with other folks and having grassroots groups like TAMSA gives a lot of hope, for people to make change. Even myself, I do a lot of work on the school board, and try to change things for AISD and for, I support people on the ground in schools, but the ledge just seems like a whole other beast. It's a whole other beast. And people don't feel like they can even get their foot in the door. So you help lead the way, and we're really honored to have you, and we'd love to have you back as we get more answers, because there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and but at the same time, with this uncertainty, we can start moving together instead of in fear. We can start coming together and making a new normal a better normal. So so I think that the vote by mail fight is something that it seems like how are other states handling that? I mean, you're given the Texas landscape. Is there anything from other states that we can learn from?
Well, some people may have watched what happened in Wisconsin, where and I don't know all the nitty gritty details, but basically they didn't, they made it hard. They made it hard, so people were standing in line, wearing their masks, socially distancing. They were not counting some of the ballots by mail. And what it did was what harassment, intimidation almost does. It made more people come out. People were like, I want to be heard. But other states have expanded it. I mean, most states, anyone can vote by mail. They want people to vote. And so that is, again, where civic engagement is really, really, really important. Because if you don't speak up, they, one, don't know what you think. They don't think it matters. Until you vote or until you start making some noise, they can ignore you. And I do think that more people want to vote. I think vote by mail is interesting in Texas. I mean, Texas does not make it super easy. We are one of the states with a pretty strict voter ID rule, where we are one of, I think, 3 or 5 states where you cannot use a student ID as a voter ID, but you can use your gun license. So, I mean, you can see who we want to have vote by who we make it easier for and who we make it harder for. And the only way to change it is really to be engaged. And that's what I think, again, the most important thing is demystifying the process of voting, explaining why it relates to every single human. And again, hopefully it's public ed, but it might not be. And I mean, I don't know. I think I did mention there's 1.5 million educators current and retired. But educators have elected governors. I believe it was Bill White. They elected him and then he did something educators didn't like and they unelected him. So like it is this sleeping giant that has been awake, but has been sleeping for a long time. And we woke up last time and people voted and we had this education session. But if everybody just rolls back over and goes to bed, it's not going to happen anymore. And we are going to have to fight for everything again. And then they're the kids. And these kids, we've got a young population of kids who deserve a better everything. And we just need to show them that this is easy and it's important and that we do it and we're role models. And so, I mean, I know I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but I really hope our tools and website are really helpful to districts across the state and to individuals to make voting accessible.
Thank you. I see that we do have one word question about drivers. I'm wondering if that's people driving voters to the polls. I know that's something that a lot of groups do, like the Texas Organizing Project, you know, to get turnout. It's amazing how many elderly or disabled people will take a ride from a stranger or from somebody that's, you know, passionate about the campaign, you know, to get a ride to the polls. So I'm wondering how that's a factor in, you know, what's being played out.
Yeah, you know, it has been a factor, and I know even some of the ride sharing apps have offered free rides to the polls. I mean, those are, it seems like a lot of it is organized locally by different groups. Texas Organizing Project is a fantastic example. I don't know what's going to happen in July. I do think people really, I mean, I think I may go ahead and apply to vote by mail. Travis County, as I mentioned, some of the larger urban districts are embracing it. And unless somebody says they can't do that, I do think they have the ability to go ahead and accept the vote by mail. So I'm going to encourage that. The other thing I will say, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but several secretaries of state ago deemed the first Friday of early voting as student voting day. And we have decided to adopt that. So every election, the first Friday of early voting is student voting day, and then we created educator voting day as the first day of early voting. And that's been adopted by our teachers, by ATPE, by a lot of our partners. And then just, it makes it sort of fun. They all are like, after work, we're gonna go out and vote. And it may be, that's the day you mail your ballot. You know, we're gonna have to revise it a little bit given COVID-19. So that's sort of a moving target. But I'd love to come back and tell you once we know what's happening with that, or make sure people sign up either to get the updates or to get text alerts or just go on and read the blogs, because I will be updating people on what and how they can vote, just to make sure their vote is heard and they don't hand their power over to the few people who it's easier to vote for.
One last question I had was, you know, incentivizing educators to vote. You know, the blue jean day, or you get to wear blue. You know, a lot of school districts have dress codes where you can't wear blue jeans unless it's like a special day or whatever. And so, you know, that's why they have that. But I'm wondering if educators saw platforms or issues that they would rally around more, if they would turn out more if candidates were speaking to those issues and making those promises. Like I know folks have been talking about, well, the STAR was waived this school year, but it arguably should be waived next school year as well, because you're going to have at least a 5-month summer slot, at least 5 months, and then when we get back, it's not going to be everybody's, you know, in the same room, or we're going to have classes of 28, hopefully, you know. So there's wiggle room, and I know we're running out of time. There's wiggle room around, like, okay, so if classroom sizes need to be cut in half to like no more than 12 or 15 kids, well, we're going to need to fund a lot more staff to have more classrooms, you know. And if folks are wanting to waive the STAR test for next year so that we have a little more cushion to catch kids up, you know, before we put forth another high stakes test on them, you know, could be issues that would incentivize educators to vote. Are you hearing other issues that people are putting forth out there?
Yes, well, I think that that assessment issue is extremely important. I think holding the legislature to not cut the funding that they put in, we're going to have a serious budget crisis at the state. I don't think we're going to get more, but we're going to have to fight to keep every dollar. I think, freezing the testing for another period of time, maybe cutting some money we spend on that. There are a lot of issues like that. And I think, Raise Your Hand Texas did have these candidate forums, and these are questions people should be asking their legislative candidates, their school board candidates, whether they're going to advocate, what they think is important. I mean, this is the time. State Board of Education, whether they support the Mexican American, studies and the ethnic studies and the African American. I mean, there are just so many things these people decide. So, I think Raise Your Hand will probably be having more candidate forums, and again, the questionnaires that the league and Teach the Vote will have are really important. And then I will say to the Blue Jeans days, different principals and different districts have done it differently, but some said if you have this percentage of people who register to vote, you can wear blue jeans for the rest of the year. You can wear, people are offering big on the blue jeans, and that is getting teachers out there to vote. Mm-hmm. So it's not a monetary contribution. You can't do that. You can't give them a gift, but blue jeans are blue jeans. You can wear, it's just a dress code change. So that's
I love it. Thank you so much, Laura. We appreciate your time today and your willingness to share your work with everyone. We have this recorded, so folks who couldn't make it can go back. Just really appreciate it. Really appreciate you and the lifelong work that you've done, and that you've how much you've sacrificed to make things better for us and for schools and staff. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. It's been a delight to be here, and thank you for all that you do. You are a model advocate, so thank you again.
Thanks. Well, on that note, I know we're running out of time. For those who are listening, our next webinar will be at noon on Thursday, May the 14th. Next week, we'll have Cynthia Rocha from L3 Lifelong Legacies, who will be speaking on building resiliency through times of change. And so please spread the word and join us for our next webinar next Thursday, May the 14th at noon. All right, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.